The year is 2008 in Massachusetts, USA. When Lexi was 15, she started experiencing terrible pain and profuse bleeding during her periods. Over 10 years, she consulted these symptoms with 3 pediatricians, an oncologist, a gastrologist, 2 family doctors, and 4 gynecologists. All those experts only ever prescribed her birth control pills, which, to no great surprise for everyone involved, did not work. The only diagnosis Lexi received at the time was heavy menstrual bleeding. It was only some years, and increasingly strange diagnosis later, that she finally found herself in a radiologist's office. There, she underwent a USG of her abdomen, since gynecological issues were being suspected. This scan revealed the presence of cysts on both ovaries, and Lexi was officially diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis. The whole process lasted a little over a decade. Now, you might want to say, oh, it was surely some sort of special case. You can't expect anyone to diagnose a rare disease in 2 weeks, right? Well, the issue is that Lexi is one of almost 176 million women around the world who have been forced to wait for their endometriosis diagnosis for years and years. So, what is endometriosis? By definition, it's a chronic illness in which tissue similar to the lining of the uterus grows outside of the uterus. It's most often, like in Lexi's case, connected with terrible pain and heavy bleeding, but also a variety of digestive issues, hormonal changes, and migraines. According to experts, every 1 in 10 Polish women suffers from endometriosis, and yet the diagnostic process still lasts on average from 7 to 10 years. Why is that? If we Google the phrase endometriosis, you'll be faced with thousands of articles from all around the world. The interesting thing that they have in common is that they claim the disease to be mysterious and enigmatic. But here's a crazy idea. What if we just studied it? After all, endometriosis, until very recently, was notoriously ignored by scholars. In 2007, there were only 393 studies published on the topic around the world. Textbooks claim that the issue with classifying endometriosis lies with its strange symptoms, lack of social awareness, and lack of research funding. Those are all obviously valid reasons, but I would like all of us to ask ourselves this. Would the situation be any different if men suffered from endometriosis? For millennia, medicine was a boys-only club. And while over the centuries men admittedly did manage to accumulate a decent amount of knowledge about their own bodies, they somehow always found a reason to avoid studying women's issues. Let us travel back in time to ancient Greece. Enter Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine. While I don't doubt that his pioneering theories changed the way we perceive health and disease even today, it's hard to ignore the fact that he ruined the medical world's perception of women for many years to come. Hippocrates, together with the great philosopher Plato, came up with the theory of the wandering uterus. They thought the womb to be a living creature, which dried out due to a lack of sexual activity and traveled upwards through the body, causing various symptoms as it went. The wandering uterus theory, or hysteria from the Greek word for uterus, quickly became the ancients' favorite diagnosis to any problem a woman faced, and it would remain so for many years to come. Time skip to the Middle Ages. The oppressive religious norms of that time period hardly allowed for any studies of the female body, or, well, any studies at all. While the wandering uterus theory was still faring very well, other diagnoses were quickly gaining popularity. For example, witchcraft and possession, which were readily easily cured by, for example, exorcisms and burning at the stake. As the ages passed and the world developed, women's medicine remained firmly entrenched in ancient beliefs. The Victorians, for example, were so fond of the wandering uterus theory that almost any undesirable female trait, ranging from depression to epilepsy to having opinions different than her husband's, could be proclaimed a symptom of hysteria. Such a patient was then either sent to an asylum, a trip to the seaside, or locked in the attic. So overall, hysteria very quickly became a convenient way of removing any undesirable women from a respectable family's life. We can safely assume that the lack of development in women's healthcare stemmed directly from the lack of female healthcare practitioners. The Victorians believed that women were too mentally unstable, obviously due to menstruation, to be able to handle the intricacies of medicine, and many peoples before them thought the same. While in antiquity, it was not uncommon for women to act as midwives or herbal healers. The Middle Ages firmly put an end to that by first killing all the wise women in witch trials, and then, for good measure, forbidding anyone without a university degree from studying medicine. Since women were not particularly welcome in universities, their jobs were taken over by men, and the female healthcare practitioners only managed to return in the 19th century. Since, as I previously mentioned, the Victorians were not particularly open towards women, and the upper classes of society even deemed it improper for a lady to qualify as a doctor, since it would mean encountering gore and nudity on a daily basis. The worst of all excuses was the fact that using their brains too much would direct women's vital energy away from their ovaries, which would turn them infertile. As such, fortunately, the world was never short on stubborn women who knew what they wanted. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson was the first fully qualified medical practitioner in the UK. She started out as a nurse, but was always bent on climbing the career. She started out as a nurse, but was always set on climbing the career ladder. At that time, in order to become a recognized medical practitioner, you had to fulfill two criteria. First, an adequate amount of surgical training, and second, a license awarded by the Society of Apothecaries in London. Thanks to her position as a nurse, Garrett Anderson managed to gather the necessary amount of surgical training by assisting with surgeries, and then marched into the Society of Apothecaries demanding her license. The society, which was not legally forbidden from accepting women, had no choice but to agree, since her other qualifications were inevitable. I'm honestly very curious as to why they never thought to just exclude women outright. Maybe they thought that one might never try, since, women are always too busy with their periods to ever do anything in life. In 2014, the idea that a woman is Maso Kazimazis, a decrepit male, was first proposed by the great philosopher Aristotle. Since then, it was in truth universally acknowledged that the female body is a smaller, weaker version of the male ideal. The repercussions of this mindset are still visible today in the so-called male norm. The word anatomy is applicable mostly to male anatomy, since women appear in textbooks and atlases very rarely and mostly in the context of the reproductive systems. You know what's worse than that? The fact that almost all studies on human physiology and the effectiveness of medications are calibrated for, yes, you wish it was for her, but the entire medical field is built around him. Meet the standard man. Studies are studies, but what about clinical trials? Surely curing diseases must be important enough to include women, right? Well, apparently not really, because here men dominate as well. And from a purely scientific point of view, that makes perfect sense. had stable hormone levels, whereas women experienced fluctuations based on the pace of their menstrual cycles. So scientists obviously find it easier to work with male subjects. Except that unfortunately notoriously leads to neglecting women. Studies have shown that most medication works differently on women than it does on men, and, or even worse, it does not work at all. As a matter of fact, the second most common side effect of women taking meds is them not working. In 2014, the known magazine Scientific American loudly complained that including both sexes in clinical research is a waste of time and money. Some scholars to this day back this claim and are even openly opposed to including women in studies. Their reasoning is that, well, as much as sex might play some difference, the lack of previous data is simply a reason enough to not make including women in research compulsory. I just want to point out that the lack of previous data obviously stems from the millennia of ignorance, but what do I know about the world? In the world of modern medicine, the exclusion of women is visible wherever you look. Diseases which affect both sexes are really only described through the lens of the male symptoms, which significantly slows the diagnostic process in women, even in such dire cases as stroke or heart attack. Medication, especially painkillers, either work differently than they should, don't work at all, or worst of all, are even denied to female patients, because apparently when a woman complains of pain, she's overreacting and should rather be given calming drugs than actual pain medication. The cherry on top of all that is the fact that whenever somebody actually bothers to do a study of women's issues, it usually ends in a spectacular fiasco. I let you guess 3 times what aspect of endometriosis Paolo Marcellini decided to study in 2013. No, he did not find a working test. No, he did not find a way to help manage the pain. He ranked the participants in terms of attractiveness. You heard that right? He compared groups of sick and healthy women in terms of physical appearance. The abstract of this study is still available online in case you were ever wondering about the waist-to-hip ratio and the size of breasts of a group of women battling a chronic disease. Do you remember her? This is Lexi. She's not dead. After undergoing several surgeries, she's now actually doing quite well and became a gynecologist to make sure that no women would suffer like she did. She described and published her case for the world to see and to call out the medical community for all that she went through. So there is a way of breaking the cycle of abuse, except you have to know that it's there in the first place.